Hello, TG Wolff here, and I'm happy to introduce you to another new author here at Mysteries to Die For. Rick Ollerman is the author of 4 novels, Turnabout, Shallow Secrets, Truth Always Kills, and Mad Dog Barked, as well as the nonfiction collection Hard Boiled, Noir, and Gold Medals. He was also the editor of Down and Out the magazine and has written numerous short stories and edited several crime fiction anthologies. Welcome, Rick, to Mysteries to Die For. And welcome all of you to Mysteries to Die For. I am TG Wolff, and I'm here with Jack, my piano player and producer. This is a podcast where we combine storytelling with original music to put you at the heart of a mystery. All stories are structured to challenge you to beat the detective to the solution. These are arrangements, which means instead of word-for-word readings, you get a performance that's meant to be heard. Jack and I perform these live, front to back, no breaks, no fakes, no retakes. This is Season 7, Games People Play. Games are about competition conducted according to rules, with participants working toward a goal. Games are a part of every culture and are one of the oldest forms of social interaction and engagement. Games can be fun, challenging, and exhilarating. They can also be intense, cutthroat, and lethal. This season, our authors have fashioned deadly games and unscrupulous villains to test your detective skills. This is Episode 9. Headbands is the featured game. This is A Head for Murder by Rick Ollerman. Jack, did you change the piano halfway through our intro?
Yeah, I didn't like it, so
Okay.
I need to change it. So it was synthetic strings 1. However, I didn't like it. So then you heard Dogsy string 1, which is this, and then you heard Pergervois, which is that. I didn't like that either. But then I came upon I think what is supposed to be spring saw pad. I like a good spring saw pad, apparently.
Only proving that we are recording this live and not editing.
Well, we had decided which one to do like 20 seconds before we started recording. And
Not true.
Upon playing it, I was like, this feels muddy. You know? I didn't like it. So.
But muddy would have been good because there's a lot of rain in today's story.
Apparently, gets you into muddy waters. I should play one of their songs.
His song.
Oh, his songs.
Song.
Wasn't Muddy Waters like in a full band, though? Wasn't the band called Muddy Waters?
No.
Oh.
The artist was Muddy Waters.
It was just one guy. Wasn't he in a band? Did he do all of that alone?
I'm sure he had a band backing him, but Muddy Waters is a person.
Well,
we are going to have to educate you on the blues.
I apologize. That one's my fault.
Now you sound like the middle-aged mom who doesn't know anything about video games.
Well, yeah, that's my bad. All right, whatever. Let's start the story.
All right. I am what I am. For 2 solid days, rain had been pelting the clubhouse roof, confining most of the guests and employees indoors. It had been falling in cascading white sheets past the windows, and the eastern sky looked more like evening than morning. "Well, people," Tripp said, disappointed, "we have officially missed our 9 o'clock tea time." 5 friends were sitting in a lounge area in the clubhouse in rural Connecticut. They looked at each other and shared a collective shrug. There'll be other days, other rounds of golf. "Bad morning for our reunion," said Jill, rubbing her arm as if cold. 3 couples, Tripp and Jill, Chad and Nancy, Jeff and Lindsay, vacationed together every year at some spot or another, and always started the week with a round of golf. "So much for tradition," said Nancy. "I'm still worried about Lindsay. Has anyone heard from her?" She looked to Jeff, Lindsay's boyfriend. "Anything?" "You know what I know," said Jeff. "Radio silence." "It's so weird, though," said Nancy. "I wonder if she lost her phone. She must have, right?" "But then why wouldn't she borrow one from someone?" said Jill. "And it doesn't explain why she hasn't arrived yet. Makes me think something's going on." "Don't make more of it than it is," said Jeff. "She'll turn up." He didn't look too assured on that point. Lindsay was flying in from a business trip to Hawaii and should have arrived last night, like the rest of them. Jeff had traveled in from Milwaukee, Chad from somewhere with his work, Nancy from their home in Chicago, and Trip and Jill from Worcester, Massachusetts. Trip snapped his fingers. I know how to deal with this rain. The others watched while he took off each shoe, peeled off his socks, and then stuffed one in each pants pocket. We used to do this when I was a kid in New Haven. Never failed. The rain always stopped. Yeah, said Chad. Eventually. And because you doofuses stuffed your pants. Otherwise, the rain would never stop. Did it impress the girls? Asked Jill. Every time. Trip winked at her. Worked on you, didn't it? Jill just raised her eyebrows and everyone else laughed. When the laughter died, Nancy asked, well, what are we going to do? We can't go anywhere without Lindsay. That wouldn't be fair. I've got it, Trip said. Hang tight. He stood and walked toward the front desk. Chad rose and said, I'm going to run to the buffet and see if there's any Danishes left. Anyone want anything? The rest of the gang demurred and Chad walked off in the opposite direction of Trip. In just a few minutes, Trip was back with a small pad of Post-it notes and a ballpoint pen. You guys ready? He said. Headbands. Jeff said, what? Oh, the game where you stick something on your forehead and you don't know what it is and you have to guess it, right? Said Jill. Bingo, said Trip. I'll write the notes and be the timer. We can switch off. He took the pen, covered the pad of Post-its with his hand, and wrote Crockpot on the top sheet. Come here, Nancy. She leaned forward and closed her eyes while Trip stuck the note to the skin just below her hairline. Jeff and Jill both read the note, Jill laughing into her hand. Okay, we'll go for 2 minutes. Sound good? He pushed the buttons on his watch. Okay, Nancy, get ready. He said go and started the stopwatch at the same time. Am I a thing? Asked Nancy. Jill said yes. Nancy asked questions like, am I made of wood? Am I made of metal? And got close with, am I found in a house? And even, am I kept in a kitchen? Before Trip counted down the last few seconds. And he said, sounding like a game show buzzer and laughing, almost. Nancy plucked the note, or Jill plucked the note from Nancy's head and turned to show her. You're a crockpot. I was about to ask if I was a toaster. I needed 10 more seconds. She looked at Trip. A crockpot? It was the first thing that popped into my head, he said. You next, Jeff, or Jill? I'm not in much a mood, said Jeff. To Jill, he said, you go. Jill stuck out her tongue at him. Wait till I tell Lindsay how you were such a wet blanket without her. This will be fun. Trip wrote out another note and stuck it to Jill's forehead. He worked his watch again, counted down, and said, okay, start. Jill rubbed her hands together. Am I a thing? Not original, said Nancy. Nope, said Trip. Am I an animal? Jill asked. This made Trip and Nancy laugh. You get it on a technicality, Trip said. What? Jill asked. Yes or no? It's a yes, Nancy said, smiling. Okay, said Jill. Do I live on a farm? No. Do I live in a zoo? No, but more laughter. Jill kept asking questions but wasn't getting very deep. Trip was watching the time when she asked, am I a predator? Depends on whether or not there's a hamburger around, said Nancy, grinning. Trip called, 5 seconds. An idea occurred to Jill and she said quickly, am I the same person I saw outside the cart barn last night? You need to be more specific, said Trip, and hurry. Well, Jeff, of course, Jill said. Ding, 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 said Trip, while Nancy asked, what's the cart barn? Well, it's the giant barn up by the driveway where they keep all the golf carts at night while their batteries charge. It's full of bats and they're protected or something, so they have to leave the doors open so they can fly in and out, said Trip. What were you guys doing out there in this weather? You make it sound like we were together, said Jill, sticking her tongue out at him. I was just walking the path down to the first tee, stretching my legs. I like to walk and get out after I get off planes, even if it is pouring cats and dogs. A hot shower afterwards always feels so good. Jill and Nancy started talking about how flying was a lot less enjoyable than it used to be. "Did you see the bats?" Jill eventually asked Jeff. "Not last night," he said. "No, I wasn't really looking." "Are you okay?" Nancy asked him. "What were you doing out there?" "I couldn't concentrate on much," said Jeff. "I needed to do something while waiting for Lindsay. Walking wasn't much, but it was something." "Still haven't heard anything then?" asked Jill. He shook his head. "Not a thing." The group was silent for a minute, each of them not knowing what to say. "Okay," said Tripp, determined to keep up spirits. "You're up, Nancy." He covered the Post-its and wrote something before tearing off the tiny page. "Close your eyes," he said, and pressed it to her forehead. "And go." "Oh, fun," she said. "Am I an animal?" Chad returned bearing plates of muffins and danishes. He handed them around as the game went on another turn or two and then broke up. Outside, the rain kept pouring out of the sky. Come rain, come shine. The bad news came unexpectedly and with a flourish. The 5 friends were seated at a table, just finishing their lunch, when the lights dimmed and then brightened. Dimmed, then brightened. The first thought was that the weather was affecting the electricity, and Nancy said, "This is all we need." But a small man in a neat dress shirt and tie stepped to the entrance and announced that he needed everybody to hear him. "That's the club manager, Mr. Kurt," said Tripp. "Everyone," Kirk said. "I'm sorry to have to ask everyone to remain in their seats. I apologize for the inconvenience, but there are some people here that need to talk to you. To each of us, that is." He appeared somewhat embarrassed as he turned and looked over his shoulder. From behind him came 2 other men in suits, as well as a number of uniformed policemen. Oh, what's this?" said Tripp. "Something's up. Those 2 are plainclothes cops, I bet." "Lindsay's missing all the fun," said Nancy, straining to see what was going on up front. The 2 men in suits were indeed police. Detectives, actually. "Hello, everyone. My name is Detective Spencer. This is my partner, Detective Flores. We'd like to ask that everyone remain in their seats. We're going to be coming around to each table, taking you out to Mr. Kirk's office one by one and asking you some questions." A murmur began to circulate through the room, and Spencer held up his hands. "Please, everyone, I appreciate your patience, and I know this isn't fun for anyone, but it's necessary, I assure you. At least," he gestured toward the windows, "no one's going to be late for their tea times or tennis dates." "What's going on?" someone called out. Another said, "I'm a lawyer." "Me too," came another voice. "Very nice," said Spencer. "You will all get your chance to tell me who you are shortly." "Oh my gosh," Jill said to her table. "I wonder what's going on." It wasn't until the police had taken out and returned a half-dozen people, all staff, that the friends' moods really seemed to darken. "This has to be serious," said Chad. The girls nodded, and Tripp said, "We'll find out soon, I imagine." Jeff kept his hands in his lap and didn't look up. Lindsay still hadn't appeared. It took another 45 minutes before the group learned that she never would. Detective Spencer was not a tall man, but he still was not easily overlooked. His hair was worn in a high and tight style, and he carried himself in a way that commanded respect. He was the kind of man other people tended to address as sir without a definitive reason, unless they knew he was a cop, of course. That in itself was plenty of reason for most people. He had a habit of keeping his left hand in his pants pocket. He had a slight deformity of the last 2 fingers, but it wasn't obvious and most people tended not to notice. The body of Lindsay Strauss had been identified by the driver's license in the back pocket of her jeans. She had been discovered by an employee of the club, one Frank Ballou, who claimed to have been checking on the recharging golf carts, making sure they were all hooked up in anticipation of the eventual dissipation of the rain. Spencer made detailed notes of his story, as he would do with all of the people he considered suspects. "Do you always check on the status of the golf carts in this kind of weather?" Spencer asked Ballou. No, sir. Well, not necessarily, Baloo corrected. I don't know what to say. I just thought I could go out and check on them this morning. I mean, with the rain, it's not like there's a lot to do in the clubhouse or the pro shop. Did anyone ask you to go? Asked Spencer. He shook his head. No, it was my idea. If I can say, I don't think it's unusual or anything. It's just sometimes we check on the carts. Spencer looked him up and down. These are the same clothes you were wearing. Baloo tugged at his uniform shirt. They are? How, may I ask, did you manage to stay so dry? Baloo shrugged. I grabbed one of the golf umbrellas in the pro shop. Only my feet and my pants below my knees got wet. So I see, said Spencer. And the girl's body? Was it wet or dry? Having viewed the body himself, Spencer already knew the answer, but he wanted an idea of how observant the Baloo boy had been. Dry, sir, he said with certainty, then hesitated. I mean, her hair was dry, I saw that much. I'm not sure about her clothes. It's not like I touched her or anything. Spencer nodded. Lindsay's body had, in fact, been dry. And you looked under the bags of mulch because? Well, they weren't stacked against the wall like they should have been, like they had been, Baloo explained. It almost looked like they had fallen over, but kind of neat-like in her pattern. I went to restack them, and that's when I found her. She was right there on her back. Her eyes were wide open, and I jumped when I saw her. Did you notice the red marks on her neck? In addition to placing the time of death near 8 or 9 o'clock the night before, bruising on Lindsay's neck indicated strangulation. I don't know. No? Baloo asked. Maybe? Something didn't seem right. It's all right, son, Spencer said, cutting the kid a break. You aren't expected to have seen anything. I was just wondering if you did. Did you see any umbrellas in the cart barn? No, only the one I brought with me, he said with certainty. The detective determined that Baloo did not know Lindsay, had never met the woman, and knew nothing about the rendezvous plans of the three couples. Had there been fewer people to question, Spencer may have spoken with Baloo longer, probing for nagging inconsistencies or insightful observations, but he didn't have the feeling either would be forthcoming from this fellow. One last question, Mr. Baloo. Do you keep a locker here? Yes, Baloo said. With a change of socks and shoes, Spencer prompted. And pants and a clean shirt, Baloo said. If something happens during the day, we still need to be able to meet dress code. Of course, that will be all for now. Spencer sent him away. According to the front desk, Lindsay had been scheduled to check in the night before, and she was sharing a room with Jeff Antoine, who had arrived earlier in the afternoon, around 3 o'clock. The clerk said Lindsay didn't want to check in so much as stow her luggage until she had a chance to look for her friends in the bar. There was a coat room the club used just for that purpose, and Lindsay's bags were placed there. This was a bit strange. Most people wanted to get to their rooms and wash up after travel, and then hit the bar or restaurant. But it wasn't anything that would have alarmed anyone. Serving the clientele took many forms.
Break time. Okay, I have many interesting thoughts. Obviously, I knew within the first 20 seconds that darned cart barn meant something. I just happened to stroll down there. Well, sure, we all did. And I just happened to slip a knife in her back. It was an accident. I fell down. I just went about my day.
She was strangled.
Yeah, well, whatever.
I just happened to fall with my hands around your throat.
Apparently. Whoops, just took a stroll down there, that's all. Anyway, while I was listening to this, I thought about something else that we forgot. Not we didn't forget. From a much earlier episode that we discovered after recording it and then didn't explain ever. The Scrabble episode. At the end, I was like, I don't know why. If you haven't heard the Scrabble episode, go listen to it. I'm about to spoil it. Or skip like 20 seconds. Anyway, the replacement dude for the guy who died.
Yeah.
I was like, why does he hate him? Well, at the beginning, the guy was like, I hate this replacement guy. I tried to get him replaced. And that one line is the reason why he did it. but I forgot that singular line when we got to the end of the story and was like, oh, why did he do it? That's why. So, yeah, the guy who murdered the other guy, the guy who died, was almost fired because of the guy who he murdered.
So what's your point in bringing that up here? That you think that there's a single line embedded in what I've read so far that may be the key to everything?
No, I thought it, and then I had to say it. That's why I said it.
So it is.
It's much simpler than that. It's. I thought it, so I said it. Yep. Anyway, this has been a cool story so far. Who do you think did it? It's probably not Hefe. He's too obvious.
Who's Hefe?
Jeff.
Jeff, okay.
Jeff.
So the three guys are Trip, Chad, and Jeff.
Yep. Just a couple of white guys.
And then the women are Jill and Nancy.
And a couple of white girls. Wow, we picked some great names here today, fellas.
Hey, I appreciate because I can articulate them well. And as opposed to the other day when I was confusing Rollins and Collins, I'm just very happy that I can say every name on here.
That is true. That is true.
Every now and then my tongue just is not into rolling those R's, man.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right off the bat, okay, so Jill, Nancy, Trip, Chad, or Jeff.
Yes, you got them all right.
Right? I get all the names wrong in every episode.
Yes, you do.
I don't keep track of names. I keep track of people and events. All right?
Okay.
So this is like deliberation part 1. Jack has no evidence. He's putting it in blind. Let's go a gambling. $20 on Trip.
$20 on Trip. All right.
Yeah,
well,
and let's. And a $5 on Jill.
Okay, let's go into the next chapter, and then we'll see if Jack keeps his money where it is. Spencer stirs the pot. Jeff Antoine found himself first among his group in the club manager's office, seated across the desk from a standing Spencer. Detective Flores was keeping an eye on the club's guests that had been seated in the dining room. "What can you tell me about your relationship with Lindsay Strauss?" Spencer asked. "I don't know," said Jeff. "I loved her. She was my girlfriend. She was supposed to be here last night." Spencer nodded his head, encouraging Jeff to continue, but the man was clearly struggling, holding his head in his hands. "Well, that's the thing," said Spencer. "She did arrive last night. The cab company confirmed that they dropped her off shortly after 8 o'clock. "I didn't know that." Jeff blinked quickly as if trying to digest the news. All of us had been waiting for her. She wouldn't answer our calls." "So you've said," Spencer said. He held out his right hand. "May I see your phone, Mr. Antoine?" My phone?" Jeff took it from his back pocket and handed it over. "Here it is." Spencer took the device and opened the telephone app. "You certainly did try to call Miss Strauss. Look at this. There must be 24 calls here." Jeff strained to see the phone. Yes, I told you. I called her. I was worried." Silently, Spencer counted the actual numbers of calls and noted the times, writing them down in his notebook. Yes, you did. "I wonder why, though," he said. "The last call you made to her was at nearly 8:30. Why did you stop calling? Weren't you worried anymore?" Jeff opened his mouth, closed it, and then finally said, "Yes, of course I was." "And yet you stopped calling her. Why is that, Mr. Antoine? It's almost as though you knew she was here, isn't it?" Jeff didn't answer. "Did you know she was already here, Mr. Antoine? Is that why you stopped calling your girlfriend?" No. I was with my friends, and it seems like either Jill or Nancy was constantly trying to call her." Jeff looked at Spencer, wanting to be believed. "I could see them. There didn't seem to be a lot of point to it, not right then." Spencer played with the odds and ends in his left pants pocket, which included, oddly enough, a golf tee. "And why were you two traveling to the resort separately?" Jeff looked distraught. "She'd been in Hawaii for a business trip this past week. Lindsay is, or was, a cosmetic dentist, and she had a conference. I flew in from Milwaukee, where we live." Spencer handed the phone back to Jeff. why do you suppose she didn't let you know she was here, in town, and at the front desk? Isn't that a bit strange? I don't know, said Jeff. All I can think of is that maybe she wanted to surprise us. Me. Maybe she did, Mr. Antoine. Maybe she did. Spencer sat in the chair behind the desk. Tell me about your little group. Why are you all here? Jeff told Spencer about how they all met and became friends in college. Once a year, one of them picked an upscale resort somewhere, though not too much so, and they reunited for a week of golf, tennis, wining, and dining. They sat in silence for a few seconds, Spencer studying Jeff's face until he looked down at his lap, discomfited. Do you know anyone who would have wanted to hurt Lindsay? Spencer asked. Anyone at all? No, said Jeff. Of course not. Jill and Nancy were there. Spencer pushed forward. And you were in the bar last night? The whole time? Well, no, not the whole time, Jeff murmured. Just most of the time. Spencer's tone was matter of fact, the sound of a veteran cop. What did you do? It sounds strange, Jeff said, but I went outside. I felt claustrophobic, I guess. I wanted to get out. I needed to get out. Where did you go? Please be exact. Spencer's pen was scrabbling against his pad. Nowhere, said Jeff. Anywhere. I just walked, you know? No, said Spencer, I don't know. Did you walk near the practice green, the parking lots, the cart barn? Not the parking lot, said Jeff. I don't know about the practice green. I'm not sure where that is. But you did go to the cart barn? Spencer wanted a direct answer. Look, I was just out walking, said Jeff. I wasn't the only one out there. I must have seen half a dozen people out and about with umbrellas. You go stir-crazy after a while, even a place like this. I just wanted to get out and think about things. Spencer ground a toe in the pattern of the carpet. About Lindsay? Well, yes, of course, Lindsay. I didn't know where she was and why she wasn't calling. Didn't make sense. Jeff's hands balled into fists, his knuckle turning the color of paste. Okay, I understand. Just let me ask, what time were you out by the cart barn? Spencer was trying to develop the timeline of last night's events. Really, I don't know. I just don't. Jeff lifted his left wrist, fingers still clenched. I don't usually wear a watch on vacation. Spencer stood up again. It's okay. You can go back to the dining room now. That's it? Asked Jeff. The detective gestured at the door. Oh, I'm not sure. I imagine we'll be talking more later. Spencer was standing behind the desk again, left hand twitching. You are William Tripp Martin, is that correct? It is, said Tripp. I appreciate you talking to me, but first, Spencer pointed at Tripp's lap. I have to ask you, what's going on in your pocket? What? Said Tripp, looking down. He'd forgotten about stuffing his socks in his pants. He explained to Spencer about how he did it to stop the rain. I don't think that's how it works, said Spencer. Tripp crooked his neck to one side. Maybe it needs more time. Perhaps so. In any case, I'd like to know where you were last night. Say from 8 o'clock onwards, if you don't mind telling me. I need to ask you something first. Is Lindsay really dead? Our Lindsay? Tripp was blinking rapidly. I'm afraid so, said Spencer. Tripp wiped at his eyes. It's just so hard to believe. We all thought she was late and had lost her phone or something. He straightened in his chair. Let me see. Last night, about 8 o'clock, I was in the pro shop. I wanted to ask them about the course and how it would be after it finally stopped raining. I didn't know if they needed to keep the course shut down while it drained or close down the greens or what. Just basic shop talk with the golf pro. Spencer sat and added to his notes. What did you make of Lindsay's failure to appear? Tripp shrugged. Like I said, I think we were all thinking the same thing. Trouble at the airport. Dead. He stopped himself. Dead phone battery. I don't know. Nothing like this. Why would we think anything so bizarre? We just thought she'd turn up when she turned up. I know Jeff was worried, but he wasn't panicking, and I figured if anyone thought there might be a reason to freak, it would be Jeff. Spencer raised an eyebrow. And he wasn't? No, said Tripp, though he was more tense this morning. But Jeff couldn't have... I did wonder if maybe they had a fight, though. It was just a thought, but maybe that was keeping Lindsay away. Did you share your concerns with anyone else? This seemed like an obvious question to Spencer. Tripp answered, After I left the pro shop, I met Jill in the bar and we had a drink. We talked about it, sure, but still, everyone fights, right? It doesn't mean... No, Spencer said, it doesn't. Not all the time, anyway. So many questions. The next interview was with Chad. Mr. Willett, said Spencer, come in and take a seat. Chad sat nervously in front of the detective. Are you finding out anything useful, detective? He asked. Of course, said Spencer. Don't worry about that. I'm interested in hearing how so many of you happen to travel here separately. Jeff and Lindsay, obviously, but yourself and your wife. Chad wondered if Spencer was insinuating anything. Is that a question? Oh, it's really just a comment, said the detective. You were? I was on a sales trip in St. Paul. It made more sense economically for Nancy and I to fly separately rather than for me to fly home first and then come out with her. Spencer nodded. The explanation made sense. The detective went on to ask Chad about the time he arrived and what he knew about Lindsay's whereabouts and what he had done the night before. Nothing, said Chad. I was milling about in the bar with everyone, and then Nancy and I went back to the room. For the whole evening? Spencer wanted a definitive answer. Chad said, Well, as much as anyone, I'm sure. What do you mean by that, Mr. Willett? Asked Spencer. Nothing really, Chad said. Jill had gone for a walk apparently, and Jeff had gone out to the cart barn. I think Tripp was at the pro shop for a while. So there was a bit of drifting in and out by everyone. Is that it? Asked Spencer. Chad shrugged. About what you'd expect, He looked down at his hands. I still can't believe any of this has happened. Spencer stood up. It gets easier, Mr. Willett. If you think of anything else, or if you need anything, just ask an officer. The two men shook hands in an awkward clasp. Chad didn't appear to have much insight into anything related to Lindsay. Spencer let him go, and then he went out to the office and found a restroom. There he washed his hands, though they weren't particularly dirty, then washed his face with cold water as he mulled over the statements thus far. Something was certainly not right, but at this point, he could only guess at what it could be. Back in the manager's office, he asked the uniform officer if he could please bring in Nancy, Chad's wife, next. Spencer opened with, So you didn't know any more about Lindsay than anyone else? Nancy shook her head. No, I really didn't. I don't. This is all so shocking, I guess, and so sad. Spencer grunted his agreement. Unlike Jeff and Jill, Nancy hadn't gone out of the building in last night's rain, instead choosing to spend the entire evening in the bar area. Chad and I ate in the dining room around 6 o'clock, Nancy said. Then we went back to the room for a few minutes. I didn't want to wait for Chad, so I went to the bar to see who was there. Who in our group, that is. I was hoping to come across Lindsay. We hadn't seen each other yet. And who from your little group was in the bar when you arrived? Spencer asked. Well, Jeff was there already, and Jill. Tripp walked through and told us he was going to go to the pro shop to talk about the golf course, but he came back. Then Jeff said he was going to go to his room, and we just thought he was going to try to get a hold of Lindsay again. Then Jill said she was going to go back to her room and probably take a little walk. I thought she meant up and down the halls or something. Nancy finished, hoping she was giving the right answers. Spencer kept writing in his notebook. Why did Jeff have to leave to try to get a hold of Lindsay? Surely he could have dialed her number from the bar. I don't know, said Nancy. You don't know him, but Jeff hasn't seemed himself this trip. I think something's wrong with him, something personal. This was meat on the bone for Spencer. Like his health, perhaps? Nancy shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. I thought it might actually have something to do with Lindsay and her not being here. I remember wondering if she was actually coming. What do you mean? Asked Spencer. I thought this vacation had been planned for the 6 of you for many months. Oh, it was, Nancy said quickly. What I meant was that I wondered if maybe she and Jeff were having some problems. You know. Spencer grunted. And you based this on your feeling that Jeff was acting a little off? That's right, Nancy said. Really, that's the only reason. Okay, the detective told her. I appreciate your information. Thank you for talking to me. And he sent her back to the dining room to be with her friends. Finally, he asked to have Jill brought in. That, he believed, would be the final interview of whom he believed to be the principal actors in the affair. I'm very sorry for your loss, Spencer told Jill. I know this must be a very difficult thing to talk about, but I need to ask you some questions. Jill nodded. She held up a bald cloth napkin in her hand and her eyes were red. Spencer asked her variations of the same questions he asked everyone else. When he brought up Jill having seen Jeff in the cart barn, he asked her to think hard and to try to remember everything she'd seen. There's not much to tell, Jill said. I just grabbed an umbrella and I went outside for some fresh air. I love the smell of falling rain. So I went for a walk a little ways down the cart path, and that brought me to the big barn. And where was Mr. Antoine when you first saw him? Spencer asked. Well, he was on the path too, said Jill, just outside the cart barn. Spencer wanted a more specific answer. Did you see him inside the barn? Jill angled her head to the side. No, she said. I think it was too dark to see anything inside, really. I could see a silhouette in the front door. Did you speak with him? Spencer wanted to be sure there was no mistake. Oh, yes, said Jill. He was drenched, though, and I offered to share my umbrella with him, but he said no. Mr. Antoine didn't have an umbrella of his own, asked Spencer, scribbling away. Not that I saw. He was soaking wet. Jill was sure of it. Spencer looked up, but he was completely dry when you saw him later in the barn. Oh, of course, Jill said. He must have changed clothes back in his room. Said Spencer. He certainly must have. One more question, if I may. Why did you suppose that Lindsay was out of touch with your group? Surely you must have thought of reasons beyond an uncharged or lost phone. Well, nothing I wanted to share with the rest of the group, said Jill. Spencer studied her features. What do you mean? Jill fidgeted in her seat. You know, we talked on the phone before all this, making plans for clothes to bring and that kind of stuff. All of us were looking forward to this trip. Go on, the detective said. Well, before Lindsay left for Hawaii, I made a joke or something about how she got to go on 2 vacations in a row, first to the islands and then here. But she didn't answer me right away. I told her it was going to be fun having the 3 couples all together again. I said the 6 of us would have a great time. Spencer saw Jill's nose twitch and wondered if it was significant. He never put much faith in reading the body as a lie detector, but there were certain observable signs of distress. And what did she say to that? I don't remember exactly. Was this an evasion from Jill? Something about how one couple would enjoy the trip? Something like that. Spencer turned a page in his notebook and wrote some more. Did she happen to indicate which couple? No, said Jill. She wasn't being specific. He followed with, did you guess at which she was referring to? Or who? I didn't know, said Jill. She sounded sad, and I took it just for one of those things you say when you're not happy. That's what I thought. One more thing, said Spencer, standing again. Were Jeff and Lindsay having problems in their relationship? Were they going through anything, a rough patch, anything like that? It's been so long since I've seen them, I really couldn't say. Tripp's been gone so much himself lately that I've had my own issues to deal with. Jill almost looked like she could cry. I don't know what else I can tell you. And Spencer didn't know what else he could tell her, so he let her go. Then he sat down at the desk and read through his notes. Finally, he took his pen and started at the top of a blank page. He had a number of basic theories. Now he had to figure out which one of them was correct. All right, Jack, we're at the deliberation.
I was playing straight church music. That was gorgeous. It didn't fit the theme that well. I'll admit, it felt like this was like someone's dying moment. It was amazing music, though.
I can't remember.
To thank Mr. Ollerman, is that his name?
Yes.
For allowing me to play such amazing music.
Stop.
Whenever I play great... What?
Stop.
Whenever I play great music, I like to get a southern accent.
Who did you put money on as the killer?
20 on Trip, which I think I lost.
And
Jill, I got a $5 on. I think I could get
okay.
that 5.
Okay. Well, before we get deeper into your thoughts here, I want to remind people that Mysteries to Die For remains ad-free. And in exchange for not making you doubt your sanity at this particular moment, support our authors by checking out their backlist and picking up a title. This week is Rick Ollerman. Check out his website for his novels and the nonfiction. And then you can also search for him on your favorite bookseller's site.
Yes, you can.
So, Jack, Detective Spencer and Flores have a Clubhouse classic on their hands to figure out who strangled Lindsay Strauss.
Here's what we know.
Here's our suspects, although you actually have the names pretty memorized this time.
Yes. Jeff, Trip, Chad, Nancy, Jill, and the dead Lindsay. That's right. I have all of them.
You did. This is the first story where you have all the names. You made fun of them being, what did you call them, white names, but you actually got all the names right.
People pick, you see, if you pick too unique of a name like Allegra, I remember that 4 seasons in the future.
You do.
I don't remember who wrote Allegra, but I remember that name.
Didn't K.M. Rockwood?
It might have been K.M. Rockwood. The point is that I either remember them through the story or remember them forever. You choose which one.
Here is what we know. Lindsay Strauss was expected to arrive at the golf course around 8 p.m. Her boyfriend, Jeff, and her friends repeatedly tried to reach her with no luck.
Weird.
The hotel staff report that Lindsay did arrive around 8, but instead of going to her room, the one that she shared with Jeff, she opted to stow her bags and go to the bar to find her friends.
Interesting. Where Jeff was.
Well, around 8 o'clock. Was he there at 8 o'clock?
I thought he was.
The next morning, her body was discovered in the golf cart barn. She'd been strangled and was hidden behind some fallen bags of mulch.
Interesting.
Despite the rain, her hair and clothes were dry, and no umbrella was found.
I think, interesting.
Mm-hmm. While waiting for Lindsay, a game of headbands was played. Tripp was the leader. Jill, Jeff, and Nancy played throughout. Chad went to the buffet for snacks and then played after he returned.
I don't know if that had much to do with the actual murder.
On Jill's first turn, Jeff had been written on the Post-it, and in guessing, Jill revealed that she saw Jeff at the cart barn the previous night, and he had been soaking wet from the rain.
Interesting. But Jill was dry. Not Jill.
Lindsay was dry.
Darn it.
And Lindsay was dry, and there was no umbrella.
No umbrella. But Jeff also didn't have the umbrella coming back. So
but he was soaked.
Here? He was soaked. So, hang on. Maybe.
I see light bulbs going off over Jack's head.
The umbrella theory doesn't make sense. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. Where did the umbrella go?
Exactly.
Because clearly it was taken to the barn to keep Lindsay dry.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd think coming back, you could say, oh, Jeff was soaked, but he had an umbrella. Why was he soaking? Well, that could have been why, but he doesn't have an umbrella still.
Doesn't have an umbrella.
But who does? Jill has an umbrella. Well, that doesn't mean anything. She just kind of... Whatever. Keep going.
Nancy thought something was off about Jeff, suspecting he was dealing with something personal.
I swear, if it's Jeff, I'm going to be mad, because Jeff's too obvious. It's got to be Jill.
On the evening in question, Jill had walked along the path using a golf umbrella. Nancy stayed in the resort, first going to her room with Chad, and then going to the bar without him. Tripp went to the pro shop and talked with staff. Jeff wandered around without a destination or an umbrella.
Interesting.
Jill reported that in their last conversation, Lindsay indicated that this wasn't going to be a happy trip for 2 couples.
Happy trip.
I wrote that. Okay. Whose story is soaking wet?
Haha.
Haha.
Okay.
I work hard on those.
So Lindsay said 2 couples weren't going to have a good trip.
Yep.
Well, Jeff was clearly one of them.
Well, Jeff and Lindsay.
There's an affair. Somewhere in here, there's an affair. Also, if you're wondering, listeners, I am not facing TG Wolff. I'm actually staring at her through the reflection of a window.
You can see me?
Yes, I've been staring at you through that. Anyway,
that's really
I'm
funny.
facing the opposite way of her. So, let's think here.
I
think Trip and Jill... wait, Trip and Jill are already together, right?
Trip and Jill are married.
Trip and Jill are married. So it means maybe it's a gay affair. No, probably not. 2 couples. 2 would be destroyed by an affair. So I think it would... obviously, Jeff and Lindsay is one couple that's going to feel terrible. Chad and Nancy, they haven't said much, and they didn't do much. They were kind of just there, right? What did Chad and Nancy do? Did they ever leave
Chad
the
and
hotel?
Nancy, they flew in separately. Chad had been on a work trip, so he flew in from, I think it was St. Paul, and Nancy flew in from their home. No, I can't remember where that was, but they flew in separately.
Louisville, I think.
I was
don't
thinking
remember.
Chicago.
Oh, it
Milwaukee.
was Chicago. No, someone else was Chicago.
Somewhere up north.
Who knows?
Okay, so they flew in separately. Then that night,
yes.
Hold on, I'm looking. My eyes are looking for the thing. Nancy stayed inside the resort, going first to their room with Chad.
Okay.
And then leaving him in the room, and she went to the bar without him.
She went to a bar.
To the bar, like the the resort bar.
And Chad stayed in the room?
It just,
as far as we know.
As far as we know. It just says that Nancy left him there and went down to the bar.
I think realistically, if any of these people were determined enough, they could have done it. But I don't think all of them did it. I was also thinking it could be a 2-person job. I don't think Jeff did it. Jeff seems weird. Jill had the opportunity to, and the fact that Trip just wasn't there, that he went to wherever he says he went to, being the pro shop.
He went to the pro shop.
Is there any proof that he went there?
Well, I think the fact that he talked to the golf pros, even though it wasn't part of this dialogue, I think you can consider him alibied.
Oh, well, I'd take Trip back. What about Jill? Not Jill, Nancy going to...
Nancy was just in the bar.
But is that her alibi? Is there anyone saying, no, she wasn't at the bar?
That wasn't part of the questioning, but again, being in a public place, because again, everybody in this resort couldn't leave.
Interesting. I'm going to gamble. I refuse to believe that my best friend Jeff could have been a murderer.
Okay.
Too obvious. Everything points to old Jeffy boy. Jeffariah. So I'm going to go Jillith, because me and her went up a hill to get a pail of water. I should have said her and I. I'm sorry, Jill and I. Whatever proper English is. And when she was up at the water, she told me she was going to kill Lindsay. So that is my proof.
You're going with Jill.
I'm going with Jill. I'm going to win my $5. I'm going to lose 20, but that's fine. That's fine. I'll only be down 15. It'll be a good day. And if it is Trip, I still lose because no, if it's Trip, I still win my $20. Yeah, okay, let's go.
All right, listening detectives, I hope you've logged in who your suspect is. A quick reminder to our mystery readers to check out our print and ebooks. The companion book for the seasons 4, 5, 6 are available in ebook and trade paperback from online retailers. And this season's book is being released in 2 parts. Opening Gambit, released in March 2024, and Part 2, Final Move, will be out in September. Buy one for you and a mystery lover you love. The dimes and quarters from book sales really do support the podcast and keep Jack in hairbands and interesting things on his keyboard. Now, it's Rain, Rain, Go Away. Detective Spencer and Flores sat across from each other in the club manager's office. Uniformed officers were keeping the grumbling resort guests together in the dining room while the rain continued to fall in sheets against the glass. "Well, boss, what do you think?" asked Flores. "It's an interesting case," said Spencer, "but I think we should be able to get to the bottom of it. If we can successfully arrange things just so, with a little bit of luck, the solution should fall into our laps." Flores wasn't sure his partner actually believed in luck and was certain Spencer wasn't depending on it, but he sat back and waited for Spencer to recount his notes. First of all, we will agree to look at the people that knew the victim, Miss Lindsay Strauss. Unspecified lunatics are rarely the answer, and to be quite serious, random killers of young women tend to not work in typhoon-level storms. Secondly, I think it's safe to say that we can eliminate young Frank Bellew, the unfortunate resort employee who happened upon the body. I understand his nervousness. Electing to venture forth in this deluge to do a job that didn't require doing, at least not at the point in the day, seems a little strange, though not wholly so, but every case has its oddities. It would be a stretch to even call this one of them. Flores nodded and said he agreed. Spencer continued. There are a couple of characteristics in this case at play that perhaps are significant, however. First, there's the matter of Lindsay's umbrella. She didn't have one, said Flores. That is correct, said Spencer, and yet her body was dry. So an umbrella had almost certainly been present at one point. If the umbrella was not the murder weapon itself, why would the killer take it? Possibly it could identify the killer in some way? Flores tilted his head. Did the clerk at the desk give Lindsay an umbrella? They did not, said Spencer. And what woman goes outside in this weather, sharing an umbrella with somebody she doesn't know? You're right, said Flores. So you think the killer is one of her friends? Spencer pursed his lips in reply. It would seem so. One must consider Jill, one of the friends that had also spent time outside, enjoying the ambiance of the downpour. Flores nodded. Go on. Deceit plays a role in this case, Flores, beyond the killer not readily confessing their crimes. Jill was outside. That is a truthful answer to the question. But was her reason as sincere? You think she could have been out there with someone else? Flores' eyebrows were arched. The only person who has come to light that would fit the circumstances would be our victim. Spencer gave his partner an inquiring look. Could Jill have killed Lindsay and then lied about it? And what do you think? Asked Flores. Spencer took a moment before responding. He always loathed to answer his own questions. He thought he risked too much by leading the conversation. If she didn't lack the physical strength to strangle Miss Strauss with her bare hands, or in any case to do it without some significant signs of a struggle, we might well be served to discover a motive. Jill could have been jealous of something to do with her fiancé, Jeff, and struck out in a passion of rage. That led Flores to consider something else. Do you think Jeff was having an affair? There are no signs, said Spencer. Or Jill could have been the one having an affair with Lindsay, who wanted to break it off, and on and on. Again, it's highly unlikely Jill could have physically done the crime, so I think it's safe for us to discard that line of thinking of what-ifs. Flores nodded slowly. Well, then who's next? Spencer took a moment with his notebook. The other wife, Nancy, was in the bar all evening and hadn't gone outside. I think it's safe to set her candidacy aside for the moment as well. Did you verify Tripp's alibi in the pro shop? Flores took out his own notebook and consulted his notes. Tripp had gone down to the pro shop and talked directly to the club pro. The shop closed at 8 o'clock, whereas he went to the bar, found Nancy, and sat down to drinks. As he was in the company of one or the other girls for the rest of the evening, he should be in the clear. He should indeed, said Spencer. And that leaves the boyfriend, Jeff, and the remaining member of the party, Chad. Now things can get pretty interesting. Do you think it's the boyfriend? A lover's quarrel, perhaps? Asked Flores. Spencer shrugged. It's the most likely answer. Lindsay may have chosen poorly, and that decision could have cost her life. Flores put down his notes. What do you think of for a motive? We know that Lindsay was in Hawaii prior to coming to the resort, said Spencer, and she was not there with her boyfriend, Jeff. If one half of the couple is called to a business in a place like that, It seems likely the other half would take the opportunity to at least consider being the other's plus one. After all, it's not like business is conducted at a conference 24 hours a day. Leisure activities are built into the agenda of these conferences. Otherwise, why go to the effort of booking them in such exotic locales? Yet Lindsay spent her week in Hawaii on her own. Or so we're told. Flores jumped on this. So do you think Lindsay was having an affair? Spencer said, certainly not with her friend Jill at any rate. No, I think this is a case where we have a much more traditional motive on our hands. Flores counted off on his fingers. Jeff met her in the lobby, or just outside, and walked with her under his umbrella to the cart barn. He confronted her and, in a rage, killed her. That would follow the numbers pretty closely, wouldn't it? It is likely Lindsay would meet with her fiancé quickly after being gone for a week. She didn't even wait to get her luggage to their room. Of course, she would share an umbrella with the man, and the cause of death, the strangulation, is a deeply personal method. Her affair would have been somehow exposed. The two of them argued, and he choked her to death. And? Spencer raised an eyebrow. And he was busted when they were playing that game, and Jill revealed that she'd seen him at the cart barn that night. Flores stood. I'll go arrest him now. Spencer held up his hand. Sit, Flores, sit. There is yet something more to consider. Flores settled back into his chair. Something more? What could there be? His partner said, first, we have one more question to ask. Let's bring in the remaining 5. Spencer leaned back in the chair while Flores went out with his usual long strides and returned in just a few moments with the remaining group of friends. Flores stood by the door and, rather than sit down, the 5 suspects formed a sort of semicircle behind the 2 desk chairs. I just have a couple of things, said Spencer, eyeing each of the men and women. Jill, how did you know Jeff had been at the cart barn the last night? She wrinkled her forehead. I told you this. I saw him out from the cart path. Oh, yes, that's right, said Spencer. And how about you, Tripp and Nancy? How did you learn of Jeff's sojourn to the cart barn? Tripp spoke first. We were playing a game, headbands. I came up with the answers and I wrote Jeff's name on a post-it that I put on Jill's forehead. In the process of figuring out who or what was written on the note, Jill let out that she had seen Jeff at the cart barn, asked Spencer. Well, it wasn't a secret or anything, Jill said. She was turning pale. It was just a game, said Nancy. Jeff stood quietly, eyes down. No one else looked at him. And where was Mr. Chad Willett while you were playing this game? Asked Spencer. Nancy shouted out, He was with us. We all played together. No, that's not quite true, said Tripp. Remember? Chad went to the buffet line and brought back treats. That's right, said Jill. He came back during Nancy's second turn. Didn't you, Chad? Spencer looked into Chad's face. Then how did you know to tell me that Jeff had been at the cart barn during our interview when you had not been there to hear it? Well, Chad was nonplussed. He started cracking his knuckles. One of them must have said something, he offered. Look, it was just a stupid game. Anything could have happened. Will you lift your shirt for me, Mr. Willett? Spencer asked him. Chad started, What? Just a little bit. They all watched as Chad pulled up the front of his shirt. Your stomach is as tanned as your forearm, said Spencer. I trust you used appropriate sunscreen on your trip. Spencer consulted his notes, but Flores, watching from the doorway, knew his partner was doing this for show. You were traveling last week for business, you said. I did say yes, said Chad, but that was all. Interesting, said Spencer. May I see your phone? No, I don't think so. Despite his tanned face, Chad seemed to pale in front of the crowd. Really, Mr. Willett, we can all stand here while I procure a warrant for your phone. It won't take long. Jeff made a growling noise and took a step toward Chad, but Flores was faster and placed himself between the two men. Slowly, Chad handed his phone to Spencer. Nancy was staring at her husband, color filling her cheeks. said the detective as he scrolled through some screens. There don't seem to be any text between you and Miss Strauss. No, said Chad, of course not. Spencer tapped the screen a few more times. However, he said, you made a number of calls last week, according to your own phone log. Some to your Nancy, which is good. You should call your wife when you're out of town. Other than the sound of the rain splashing against the ground beyond the window, the room had grown silent. But there are a number of calls here to an 808 area code, and I happen to know where that is. You do too, don't you, Mr. Willett? Chad dropped to his knees, and Nancy began to sob. Chad said, she wanted to break it off, to stop seeing me. I couldn't let her go. Flores, Spencer said. Arrest Mr. Willett, if you please. I suspect he may have taken his last vacation. The end.
Screw you, Chad. You just made me lose $25.
Wasn't that a cool story?
It was a cool story, but they didn't say anything. Oh, darn it. I should have gamed it more. They didn't say it. If this was Agatha Christie, I would have said, no one mentioned Chad, so it has to be Chad.
No, Chad was in his room and we just left him there, like, as far as we know.
Pretty much.
Stayed in his room.
Oh my gosh. I am livid.
You don't look livid.
I'm not livid. I just wish I thought I was... Okay, you know what? Everything made sense. Everything made sense.
Everything did make sense.
But
it was such a carefully constructed mystery that, like, everything mattered. Like, you know, that she was dry, that Lindsay was dry, that there was no umbrella.
The umbrella's what got me. It seemed like there was never one.
Well, that's the thing, is it couldn't have been Jeff because he was soaking wet. If he had an umbrella, he would have been dry.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Jill, who I think was your first choice, it wasn't really played up, but I guess we didn't really talk about it, about whether she would have had the strength to strangle another woman without having an actual fight.
I did think about that. And I don't know, I was like, nah, that won't be something the author will care about. No, the author paid attention. Darn it.
Yeah.
So, well.
Yep.
I'll get him next time.
So here, I got some information for you about headbands.
Alrighty.
So our story today is a take on the fandom game headbands, which is Hedbanz, which is pronounced the same but spelled differently. The game has many variations and is published by Spin Master Games and was first released in 1991, making it over 30 years old. Rick gave us an excellent description of the game in the story. It seems like a cross between 20 Questions and Indian Poker, which was featured in episode 5. We gave the background of the poker game there, so we're going to dive into 20 Questions. According to Wikipedia, 20 Questions originated in the US and was a very popular parlor game in the 1800s. It got a modern reboot in the late 1940s when it became the basis for a weekly radio quiz show. Later, it jumped to television. All in all, the game was in front of American audiences from 1946 through 1954. Versions of the game were on radios and televisions for audiences in Canada, Hungary, Ireland, Norway, Poland, and the UK. Speaking of the UK, Jack, do you remember the version of the game that was in the original 101 Dalmatians?
No.
What's my crime?
Oh, never mind. I loved that, okay? That was actually the most terrifying part of the movie, and I was always so confused what was happening there. I was just like, I get that it's his crime, but what's the point of him doing it if he stays in jail for another 100 years or something?
That was the movie that Jack obsessed on when he was a little guy, and I think my husband and I still know every word to that version because I think we watched it no less than 200 times.
Yeah.
Hey, Jack, guess who loves headbands?
Taco Bell.
Teachers.
I was close.
In searching for the roots of headbands, I found many posts on educator sites of ways to use the bones of the game the way Tripp did. Well, not to entertain his friends, but as a way to review materials for tests. So there's some links in the show notes to Wikipedia. So another few words about our author today, Rick Ollerman. As I mentioned, he's the author of 4 novels. So that's Turnabout, Shallow Secrets, Truth Always Kills. I really like that title. And Mad Dog Barked. We live that life, especially thanks to Amazon and everything else as our dogs go nuts. He also is part of the nonfiction collection, or he wrote it, Hard Boiled, Noir, and Gold Medals. He was also the author of Down and Out magazine and has written numerous short stories and edited several crime anthologies. So his website is in the show notes, rickolerman.com. Check him out. That wraps up this episode of Mysteries to Die For. Support our show by subscribing, telling a mystery lover about us, and giving a 5-star review. Check out our website, tgwolff.com/podcast, for links to this season's authors. Mysteries to Die For is created and hosted by TG Wolff and Jack Wolff. A Head for Murder was written by Rick Olerman. Music and production are by Jack Wolff. Episode art is by TG Wolff. Join us next week for a toe tag, which, as you all know now, is the first chapter from a fresh release in the mystery, crime, or thriller genre. Then come back in 2 weeks for our next original story, Hunting for Clues, by Nick Andrzejczyk. I'm sorry, Nick, I just butchered your name. Nick Andrzejczyk, where a scavenger hunt is the featured game. All right, Jack, take us out.